Welcome, heathens and witches, to the Horn
and Cauldron
podcast. Yeah, we're back at it again. It's been a little while. We're getting back into it. We talked about all this during the pub chat last week, whenever that happened. And so we're getting back into it with this deep dive, which we are very excited for. Before we get into the nit and grit of that, like this video, comment below, share, subscribe, and do all the things that we're commanded to tell you to do by the machines. And I've been John Norgrove, and this has been Julie Norgrove, so welcome. And
I thought you were already signing off.
We're already signing off, guys. Deuce. I know I said it's been, but I just mean we are. It's been, we are, have them. You know what I'm talking about.
Man.
It's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
Listen, it's too fucking hot.
It's too hot.
It's too hot for this.
We just finished watching the first episode of the new season of Black Mirror.
A pretty upsetting episode of Black Mirror.
And I'm having a bit of an existential crisis.
All the dread.
Well, first of all, that
we're
episode,
all awful.
But also, I just got new hair.
Yeah.
And I didn't know about this.
It's not
and it's
dissimilar.
Really adjacent.
Yeah.
To it.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling
the Venn diagram, a bit of overlap.
Feeling a bit of a way about that right now. So that's hilarious.
And the ultra fun existential dread of maybe you all live in a simulation. Maybe you are 5 levels deep of a supercomputer dreaming nightmares.
But also
that's fun. I love that.
But also maybe at some point I am played by Salma Hayek.
Yeah,
and I'm
not, you
totally
know what?
Okay with that.
Wherever that happens in the Matrix, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I'm here for that.
Yeah.
I'm here for that. All right, well, anyway, I guess we should do this thing.
Yeah, so deep dive Rama, we're talking about Bast or Bastet.
Yeah, that's right. So before we get into it, we're probably going to be using Bast and Bastet sort of like interchangeably throughout this. And part of the reason for that is because they're really sort of used interchangeably just about anywhere.
Are cool.
But also, did you know that Bastet, the way that we pronounce that, is sort of like a weird amalgamation of not only her name, but also people trying to get us to pronounce her Bast correctly, and also the Ptolemaic Greeks trying to get us to make it so that she's connected to Isis.
I mean, yeah, I feel like, you know, because if you're seeing Bast and Bastet side by side, I feel like when I see Bastet, my programming tells me not to pronounce that last
E-T.
Well, just the last T, right?
Yeah.
It's just Bast, right?
Yeah.
I guess it would be the last E-T, because if I was going to pronounce the T, I would say based. From like an English standpoint, which is not what it is. But I think of the E, I'm thinking of this in like, my brain just immediately goes to like French.
Yeah.
With Bastet. Yeah. So I don't want to call it Bastet. I want to call it Bast. And recognize that the T just allows me to use the E as like a drop off or whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But, yeah, that's great. I love that name's an amalgamation. Look,
it kind of is. So
history.
So originally,
that's why you gotta go to college for so long.
So stepping back a little bit, and just so y'all know, I am not like a linguist scholar. I am sort of an
word doctor. Word doctor is the word that you're talking about. Yeah.
So
we ain't no word doctors. You tell me how to pronounce this.
We don't entirely understand how the ancient Greeks pronounced some of the vowels in their words. Like, we know some of them, but we don't know all of them, and it's a little complicated because there also might be like regional differences or differences in like time, because they spoke this language for a very long time. And obviously there's going to be drift, right? So it's indicated that Bast's name was originally Bast, B-S-S-T, with a vowel in between the B and the S, right? So there's kind of a problem with that, in that at a certain point, from what I read, the ancient Egyptians didn't pronounce the ending T, so it would have just been bis. But that wasn't really her name, so people added on the het at the end to get you to try to pronounce the T at the end. So that became Bast, even though it was spelled Bastet. And also to further complicate things, when Egypt was ruled by the Ptolemaic dynasty, which are Greek-speaking people, they tried to syncretize and sort of move Bastet into like being Isis of 1,000 names. And we talk about this like a little bit later, but they made it so that her name was Ba-Aset, which Aset is Isis. And so it sort of stuck. So anyway, that's your word nerd moment for the day. Yeah. So anyway, Bastet. Now I'm going to say it wrong on accident. Even though I've said it 4 ways. Bast is the goddess of protection, especially against diseases and evil spirits, pregnancy, childbirth, fertility, sex, pleasure, music, art, drunkenness, parties, perfume, retribution, hunting, war, prosperity, cats, the sun, and the moon.
Listen, work your wage. You don't need to work this hard. It's too many jobs. You know what? I know that they said that you need to work overtime, but you don't need to work overtime. Your boss, listen, guys, let me tell you about bigger adults. Your boss isn't a bigger adult. You don't need to listen to them. You're already an adult, right? Like, can you vote? Well, you're an adult now. Can you serve in the military? Are you old enough? Well, you're an adult now. You don't have to listen to these assholes. Don't do that much work, right? That's 5 jobs minimum. 5
Lots
jobs.
Of jobs. Lots
yeah,
of jobs.
Too many. It's overburdened workers here. Maybe they could unionize. Maybe that would solve all of this shit, because that's a bunch of stuff, dog. Yeah.
So Bast was worshipped as early as the Second Dynasty in Egypt, which is about 2890 BCE.
Yeah.
So like 4,500 years ago. To put that into perspective, because that's really just sort of like a mind-boggling long amount of time. She is one of the oldest deities that we've talked about in a deep dive in this podcast. Sure. First of all. And that the dates of her worship are about 300 years before the Step Pyramid, which is like the proto to the Giza pyramids.
Yeah.
So 300 years before the Step Pyramid at Djoser, and about 1,500 years before, the events in the past in the movie The Mummy. That's Pharaoh Seti the First. So
too long ago to count.
Yeah.
We don't know.
So that's between that's basically between us and Charlemagne. Not even that. It's longer than that.
Yeah, that's way back there, bro.
Yeah,
way back there,
So like a super duper long time ago, which means that really we're looking at like a huge evolution of the worship of Bast.
A lot of time to
pick on extra to pick up extra jobs.
Yeah.
And additional spellings of your name. So we're going to talk about her epithets real quick. So epithets are either nicknames. Like nicknames or titles, that sort of thing. So she's also known as the Eye of Ra, the Sacred and All-Seeing Eye, the Devouring Lady, Lady of the Ointments, Goddess of the Rising Sun, Lady of Dread, Lady of Slaughter, and my personal 2 favorite, She Who Scratches and She Who Rends.
That's dope. She Who Rends, very dope.
Very cool.
Listen, great name for a metal band. You got an all-ladies metal band, She Who Rends? Fucking absolutely solid
metal. That is the name of the band.
Oh, man, that's such a cool band name.
Most of these are, like, really good.
Yeah, Lady of Dread, fantastic band name. Lady of the East, fantastic. All of these, fantastic band names. Devouring Lady, fantastic band name.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Bast is one of the goddesses from the Egyptian pantheon. And as many of you probably know, a lot of the deities in the Egyptian pantheon have sort of like a half animal, half human thing to them, where their head is an animal and the rest of their body is human, most of the time, at least. But Bast is...
We've all seen Stargate. We know.
Yeah, we've seen Stargate. We know. We've also seen the Mummy movies. We know.
Yeah.
So Bast is fairly unique in that she is never shown fully human. A lot of the half animal type deities have sort of like a fully human form in some of the reliefs that we have, but Bast is never fully human. But she is most often shown as a slender woman with the head of a cat. And this is fantastic because my notes say sometimes shown as a cat.
Yeah. Sometimes full cat, sometimes lady with a cat head. Never fully lady, though.
Yeah, sometimes she is just fully a cat.
Sure.
Right, but never fully a lady.
Sure.
But prior
is that the song?
to yes.
Once, twice, not fully a lady. You know what song I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. Once, twice, fully a kitty.
Fully a kitty.
So prior to about 1000 BC, so like 3000 years ago, she was also shown having like a lion head. So it's more of a recent thing that she was only sort of a domestic cat. Prior to this, she could be shown having a lion head, the head of a desert cat. If you have not looked that up, prepare for like a cuteness overload because there are two types of Egyptian desert cats and they are both adorable, and one is like more regal and the other one is like more squishy fluffy. I'm here for both. Or she's also shown like with the head of a domestic cat, sometimes fully a cat and sometimes fully a lion. So we see a lot of this sort of feline thing happening here. And around this time, we also see that Bast with the head of a domestic cat started to signify Lower Egypt, and that Sekhmet was shown with the head of a lion and started to sort of signify Upper Egypt.
Okay.
So we have sort of an interesting derivation there. We'll talk a little bit more about her relationship with Sekhmet in a bit, but this isn't really a hard and fast rule. Sometimes in illustrations after 1000 BC, we see Bast with a lion head or even a mane, or like maybe wearing a lion's head in sort of like a Hercules sort of a way. It's just not as common. But again, we're looking at like 4,500 years of like history there and like individual artistic interpretation. So I'm sure there's a lot. And usually when you see Bast, she's holding an ankh, which signifies long life. She has a papyrus wand, which represents Lower Egypt. She is typically holding a sistrum, which is like it's an ancient percussion instrument. It's kind of like a rattle. It's usually attributed to Hathor, but Bast also carries it. Some other deities do too. And she also sometimes carries a was scepter for strength. And typically when we see that she's carrying this scepter that is not the papyrus wand, that it's in the shape of a snake, because cats and snakes, mortal enemies.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then lastly, she's often shown as a litter of kittens, with a litter of kittens.
Sometimes she's one cat. Sometimes she's 5 cats. Who knows?
And this is more common when you see her only in cat form, but there are a few illustrations that kind of indicate that she may be in a human form with like a litter of cats.
Sure. Well, I mean, that makes sense when she's like associated with like fertility and like all that sort of shit.
Exactly.
Stuff,
see, like knowing all this stuff, you're kind of like, oh, that like kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Why she's like
that guy drew her just with a cat head. I'm like, all right, I got to do my own art. I'm gonna draw her like mostly cat, bunch of fucking kittens. Totally reasonable.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
We actually have a lot of statues of her that are found in tombs that are like a domestic cat with a litter of kittens suckling. And that sort of, ties into like fertility and protection of mothers and pregnancy and infants and childbirth, as well as just sort of like general protection, like in the States, we kind of go mama bear is the term that we use, but you could easily say like mother cat.
Sure.
Kind of thing.
Totally.
So you've got a lot of pieces.
Yeah, no, that all totally makes sense.
Yeah. So as for family, of course it's complicated because all deity families are complicated. So
Yes.
her father, her parents are either considered Ra, who's the god of the sun and ruler of all, and Isis, the goddess of healing and magic. Although that's not always the case, and sometimes she's only the daughter of Ra, and sometimes she's only the daughter of Atum, the main creator deity. So sometimes she just sort of springs forth, and sometimes there's a mom there, and it just sort of depends on what you're looking at and when and who that came from. As far as siblings go, her brother would be Horus, god of healing and protection, and also Anhur, who is the god of war and also like the patron god of the Egyptian army. She typically is shown as being married to Ptah, who is the god of craftsmen and architects, which is interesting because Bast is oftentimes shown as like a destructive deity. She is not necessarily shown, I mean, I know we talked about this fertility stuff, right? But like she is oftentimes shown as a war deity and one who takes retribution and who
mussing stuff up,
takes stuff apart. Like she like literally rips hearts out in certain myths and roles of hers. So it is,
I mean, if you're gonna eat a heart, you got to get it out still beating. It's in the name.
Yeah. So her and Ptah have one or two children, sort of depending on how you look at the things. So there is Nefertum, who is god of the blue lotus. He's also like a very attractive younger male, but I don't know that he necessarily was looked upon as being like god of hot dudes.
Sure, totally. He was just a guy super into blue lotus.
He like emerged out of one.
Sure.
I don't know how that works with her.
It's not important.
Being
You know what? It's better that we don't think too deeply.
Yeah. And then also we see typically associated with her or with Sekhmet, that their son, or her and Ptah's son, that is Mihos or Mahes, who is the god of war and also knives.
I mean, nice.
Yeah. Pretty rad.
Yeah. Pretty rad.
So, we got to talk about, in order to talk about Bast, we have to talk about Sekhmet. Sekhmet is a lion-headed goddess who is also a god of war, who also has some healing stuff and also has some protection stuff associated with her, although a lot less on the fertility and sexy fun time kind of stuff.
Sure.
Now, Bastet is often paired with Sekhmet in a variety of different things. And they are both considered to be the daughter of Ra, and they are both married to Ptah. And we also see that Nefertum as well as Mahes are their children, but like separately, not like the three of them had a kid.
Sure.
But sometimes the myths say one and sometimes they say the other. And there's also an interesting saying, which I literally had never heard before, but apparently plenty of people had. And the saying dates back from 150 BCE. So if she's been worshipped since like 2890, this is like pretty late in the game.
Yeah.
And the saying goes, she rages as Sekhmet, she is pacified as Bast. And this is interesting because this is really kind of trying to tell you like angry stuff, Sekhmet. Happy, fluffy, sex goddess stuff, Bast. But that's not really the case necessarily. It seems to have shaped some of the later Kemetic beliefs, Kemetic being the interpretation of the Egyptian religion. But this is not traditionally how Bastet or Sekhmet were personified.
Sure. I mean, that feels like one of those situations where you have a where you're trying to sort of like modernize an interpretation, so you split up, you sort of like pick and choose. You're like, all the war stuff, give it to this one, all the kinky stuff, give it to this one, like they're pushing it side to side in order to sort of delineate that, like, wow, I mean, like, you can't have a sexy lady who's also all war-y and stuff, or some like, which is crazy more because newy shit.
There's plenty of like there's like a sexy
bajillion
war goddesses.
Totally.
Like we talked about Aphrodite in the deep dive, and she was also known as a war goddess. And there's also, I believe, Ishtar, maybe, but I'm not 100%.
Well, it's that like it's that like as you move further forwards in time, you often see that sort of like
picking up of jobs. You work here long enough, you're gonna pick up extra.
You're gonna pick up some. Yeah, you're gonna pick up extra crafts, right? Well, and we're gonna change your job title so that way, like, you know, the C-suite feels comfortable with shit.
Yeah.
You know, like that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Like, it can't be the same thing. That wouldn't make any sense, even though, like, it fucking obviously does.
Oh boy, you don't even know what the things you're about to hear.
So-
Talking about this, you don't even know. So it is important to note that Sekhmet and Bastet are not aspects of the same goddess, like we see with Hecate.
Sure.
Having different aspects. Or they are also not technically sisters, although in a way they're half sisters, but that's not important. In the way that we see the three forms of brigid. And they're also not a mother-daughter relationship, similar to the way that we sometimes see Demeter and Persephone being two sides of the same coin. They are separate entities and deities unto their own thing. It just happens that some things overlap. Which is not uncommon for the Egyptian pantheon. I mean, really, it's not uncommon for any pantheon, right?
Yeah.
But I have found through my work and my research that you see that a lot more here with Egyptian stuff than you do with some other things where there's a lot more overlap. And some of that has to do with the sheer amount of time.
Sure,
that
yeah.
was sort of a practicable thing.
Surface level right now, it feels like I would almost wonder if, and I guess the only way you could really look at it is through like the evolution of language. But like I almost would believe that Sekhmet and Bast are just two ways to say the same word.
Well, and they
might
be, and there are some ways
like co-evolutions of a thing, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, and like I'm doing some shit at the temple tomorrow. I'm doing it for Bast, and you're like, that's crazy gangster. I also have some temple stuff back at home that I have to deal with for this lady Sekhmet, and you're like, oh, very interesting. And then like, slam cut to 5,000 years later, and right now today we're trying to be like, well, these two seem like the same person. Why two different names? But like in reality, it was just like time and distance allowed for like co-evolved gods with regard to like position, but with just different linguistic terminology, different names.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. So that leads me perfectly, nice segue, to Artemis. In order to talk about Bastet, we also have to talk about Artemis.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. That seems like a what? So during the Ptolemaic dynasty, things which, by the way, Cleopatra was a ruler was a Ptolemy. So during their dynasty, and they ruled Egypt for like about 300 years, things got more complicated. The Ptolemaics were sort of Greek, and they definitely spoke Greek, and they mostly worshipped in the Greek pantheon.
The Greek.
So they started to link Bastet to Artemis.
Sure.
Which is likely because of Bastet's hunting and war connotations there, right?
Sure, yeah.
And this is when Bastet started being considered a moon goddess, because Artemis is a moon goddess.
Sure.
Prior to this, Bastet was associated with the sun, being the eye of Ra, the sun himself, basically.
Dot in the sun, yeah.
Yeah. So it is odd, I find, that they syncretized Bast to Artemis when some of their core aspects contradict, like fluffy, happy, sexy fun time. Not really an Artemis thing.
Yeah. Not Artemisian.
Yeah, not really an Artemisian thing. Also,
there's no way that's the right way to say
the level of just bling, just lavishness in Bast's temples does not really jive with Artemis, because she kind of didn't really have temples, even though there are a couple of temples.
Well, not like that.
There were some people who were like, shall we say, Artemis purists, who felt that the only real temple to Artemis could be in the woods.
Yeah.
Right, sort of thing. So it is odd, but also what we see here is we see the Greeks going, oh, you've got one of those. We got one of those too. So we kind of see that. And also at around the same time that we see the synchronization with Artemis, we also see this idea of seeing Isis as Bastet's mother. Even though she's kind of not, but also sometimes she kind of is. And Isis also at the same time separately sort of in this time frame coincides with her taking on the aspect of being the goddess of 1,000 names, the goddess who is all goddesses. All goddesses lead back to Isis.
Yeah,
in a way.
Isis prime goddess.
Yeah. We actually talk about this a bit in our Isis deep dive, which is episode 18. If you want to hear more about that, that's definitely the episode to listen to. So we kind of see all of these things happening at the same time. And then lastly, to tie it back to at the very beginning of this episode, that's when we start seeing a really large amount of people using the term Bastet or Bastet, which is being used either as an epithet or turning directly into her name in this time frame. And we think that while we don't technically know what Bast means, we think we know what Bastet or Bastet means, meaning the soul of Isis. So Ba would be the word for soul, and Aset would be the term that the Kemetic Egyptians would have used for Isis. So we see a lot of that. Oh, you've got this, I've got that too, and trying to kind of do that. Yeah. It's especially
it all sounds the same. Good to go. Blend it together.
Yeah, right. It's really hard because, like, you want to, as humans, I think we want to try to find the similarities in the other things to be like, oh, I have this too. This is mine. But also you want to try to do linear translations. You want Mars is Aries. You want Zeus is Jupiter.
Sure. You want Zeus lightning, Thor thunder.
Yeah.
You want that like Hades down there, that direction. Hades that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. We like the simplified interpretation of what a god is in charge of, which obviously like as like practices evolve, as gods evolve, and as language evolves, we get this like sweet 5-dimensional Venn diagram of like what gods are and are not involved in some shenanigans.
Yeah.
And you get that sort of like, especially as you add fantasy into the mix.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, like, I mean, the easiest example is like what Marvel does to the Norse gods.
Well, and that's kind of how I feel with this,
like people are just like, look at this buff Thor, and you're like, loose. I don't know about that, or like.
Well, and then they're like, look at this Artemisian or this Isisian version of Bast. Like, I think that you really see that with this stuff too, and it's fun for me because I think that if that's what you believe and that's the relationship that you have with that deity, with that archetype, with that energy, then that's the most valid thing. It does not matter.
Well, that's
the way that you're doing it.
That applies even further than just to like worship and gods, right? Like you are a whole, I like to think about it as like sort of 3-dimensional consciousness, right? But every person you interact with perceives one 2-dimensional semi-Cartesian plane of your consciousness, right? So like your boss sees you as a specific person and like you're that person, but you also fucking certainly know that you are definitely not 100% the person your boss thinks you are. And that belief would be bonkers to hold with any degree of like functional hardness, right? But at the same time, the lady at the coffee shop or the guy at the grocery store or whatever, right? We are this like perceptive 2-dimensional, like this like sort of 2-dimensional planes slicing through a 3-dimensional object, right? Like think about it like photos of a nebula, right? like you look at the Pillars of Creation that was shot by like some of our older satellites, right? And then you look at the new James Webb version, and it's like a very distinctly and profoundly, like it's the same thing. You get that it's the same. You look at it and you're like, "Ooh, I know that," but it's like so much more now, just because we're adding more like visual data and a larger mirror means that we pick up like more detail and things like that. And I think that a lot of times, like with regard to these things, right? The way that you worship a deity is that two-dimensional, planar interpretation of a greater three-dimensional aspect of this deity's consciousness, right? Which means that your worship is exactly as equivalent, like your belief in Bast doesn't affect or change or get devalued by, like, let's say, her distinct interpretation of Bast, and as such, like, what her belief, faith, and practice around that would be, right? I think that, like, a pretty simplified form of that is the sort of, like, multiplicity of Christian faiths, right? They're all worshiping the same guy, that's Jesus, but they're doing different shit with the worship, you know? And none of them are more or less valuable because they are all very specific aspects.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that seems to be a bit of an argument among certain people who worship or work with Bast is that I don't want to say modern, right? Because this isn't really a modern concept, but
plus or minus 2,000 years modern.
Yeah, plus or minus 2,000 years modern.
Yeah.
Like a more modern concept for Bast was like, ooh, sexy kitty lady. Ooh. Sure. Like she was associated with fertility because cats. Specifically domestic cats, right? But she wasn't really like ooh, sexy cat girl for a while, because that kind of connotation we don't think really happened until kind of the Ptolemaic side of things,
later
right?
on,
until later on, because the Greeks saw these cats and they're like, ooh, cats, slinky, sexy, exotic. And then that's sort of where that like sexy cat lady thing kind of started, because while the Egyptians revered cats, and while, you know, being mean to a cat was essentially considered a crime, that doesn't mean that they revered like sexy slinky cats. They revered cats because cats were divine, and they were also divine protectors. Cats helped to eat mice and vermin, so mice and primarily snakes, because they would get into the food supply or they would bite you and you could die. So like cats were a really important piece of the Egyptian landscape there. So it makes sense that Bast is like somebody that they talk about a lot, and somebody who has this like big influence on things, but so it kind of makes sense why she has so many things that she's about, but at the same time she wasn't necessarily about like passionate making love. Like that wasn't really a thing. She was more like scare boner. Because like, yeah, she's like a slender, nice looking lady, but at the same time, like she will literally rip your heart out and eat it. That stuff kind of happens sometimes. So, I have a myth to share with you guys about Bast. Technically, it's a little adjacent, but it's close enough. It is sort of the second half of a larger myth. I'm only kind of taking the piece that is relevant to the Bast side of things.
Yeah, the Bast bit.
So this is the tale of Setna and Tabubu. I am probably pronouncing these very wrong, and if I am, I am sorry. Please tell me how to do that right.
Setna and Tabubu.
Yeah. So Prince Setna, I believe he was the son of Ramesses II.
Sure.
So he is playing a board game with maybe a spirit, maybe a deity. Sort of depends on what you're looking at there.
Seen a lot of horror movies. You got to close those board games out, guys.
And basically is like, I'm going to steal a book. I'm going to steal this very important book from this tomb. And the spirit in this tomb is like, don't do that, man. That's bad news. Bad news bears. Don't do that. And he's like, that's too bad. I'm going to do it.
He's too far away from Indiana Jones. He doesn't learn that you're not supposed to do that stuff.
That's right. Yeah. So he's too far from that.
Yeah.
He's still got another several thousand years.
Well,
so he steals.
Get on it, bro.
So he steals this magical book from this tomb.
We've seen The Mummy. Don't touch that
fully
book.
being warned not to.
Yeah.
Fully understanding the dire.
We've seen Evil Dead. Don't read that book.
So he's got this book, and he's basically like on the way I'm imagining this is he's like on his way home, and he sees just the hottest, most beautiful woman he has ever seen in his entire existence. I do not know how old this man is.
Sure.
In his entire existence, he sees her on the street and he's like, girl, you are so friggin' hot.
Listen, sometimes you got to do crimes and then pick up a hot chick.
What is your name?
Yeah, hot chick crimes.
And she's like, oh, hi, my name is Tabubu. I am a daughter of the priest, of a priest of Bastet. And he's like, I will pay you 10 gold to have sex with me right now.
Oh, very presumptive, but okay, cool. Rock and roll, I guess.
You know
Setting
what?
over here, bringing zero game, immediately jumping to the gold offer, my guy. Maybe you show her the sweet book you just
I
crimed,
think he was like, come back
right?
to my place, I'll pay you 10
I
gold,
feel
right?
like he could have sold that mixtape.
I don't think
but
it was- I don't think-
chose violence instead.
I don't think it was street sex, but at the same time, I have to sort of like have an
Oh,
aside
I'm not talking
here.
about street sex. I'm just saying, like, you could have bought her a drink and fucking tried to be smooth, right?
He's like, I
like-
make scrambled eggs in the morning.
Yeah. She's like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, how are you doing? I have money. And she's like, all right, well, normally there's a little bit more drama and conversing, but I guess thank you.
So I have to have like a bit of an aside here to sort of like, before we get further into this tale, to like, shall we say, level set in corporaties. So back in ancient Egypt, women had a lot more sexual freedom than most other ancient societies. It was not taboo to have sex, although you did not generally have sex in like a temple. That was that's good. That's good. It was nice.
I feel
like
about
that. It was not really taboo. Women were allowed to be sexual beings.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a thing that I think it's a thing that I think as Americans we kind of forget.
Pre-Jesus. So yeah.
Way pre-Jesus.
Yeah.
So anyway, he sees her on the street and he's like,
Puritans.
girl, come back to my place and I will have sex with you and I will pay you 10 gold because you are so hot. And she was like, no. But you can come to my place and I will fulfill all of your desires.
Ooh. Does he wake up in a stone carved bath of ice without a kidney?
You're
because
not allowed to read
I'm not reading ahead. I'm just telling you.
Yeah.
It sounds like he's gonna wake up without a kidney or something.
So he accepts,
It's rough.
obviously, because this guy, he no longer has a brain in his head that he is thinking with.
Yeah. Yeah, he was already half out because of the crime, and now he's full out.
Yeah,
so.
he's full out.
Yeah.
Full out, half chub.
Yeah.
So he accepts. And when he shows up, like basically he follows her to her place.
Okay.
At Bubastis, the temple of Bast, or nearby. He starts putting the moves on her. And she's like, no. Stop. And he's like, what? And she's like, I will sleep with you if you write a letter promising to give me all of your wealth. And she is so hot that this man says yes.
His lawyer is going to suggest that maybe he doesn't sign this particular prenup. Sir, this is a bad prenup.
So he says yes. He starts trying to put the moves on her again. And she's like, whoa, stop. And he stops. And she's like, I will only sleep with you if you have your children come here to sign the document to make it legal.
Oh my God, this is a terrible prenup. Listen, somebody invent time travel, go back in time, tell this motherfucker that this is a bad contract.
He agrees.
Bad news bears.
She's so hot. He wants her so bad.
Yeah.
He agrees again and starts putting the moves on her.
Bold strategy, Cotton.
And she's like, wait. Last time, I swear, my guy. Stop. stop. And he's like, what? So she says, I will only sleep with you if you kill your children, so there will be no legal claims against me.
All right. Well, listen, this prenup's getting weird, man.
It's not even a prenup. This is just pre-coitus.
Yeah, well.
Keep in mind.
Yeah. Don't sign this.
So.
Maybe go home.
He is ready to rock and roll. He is red rocketed to go.
He's
right?
About ready to commit crimes.
He's about ready to commit crimes. And he's
More
like,
crimes,
yes, I will murder my family if to finally have sex with you, you beautiful woman.
Sure.
So then instantly he sees a vision of his children being slaughtered and eaten, and their corpses eaten by the dogs in the street. Some of these myths, very graphic.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, the vision of his children, this beautiful woman, and her place in Bubastis disappear. And Prince Setna is left standing in the street, naked, with his penis in a jar.
Now, is the penis still attached to him?
Yes.
He just put it in a jar.
Well, he probably didn't think he was putting it in a jar.
Well, this is what I'm going to suggest, is do less drugs.
So
this is what happens when you take books that you're not supposed to take, guys. Leave shit be. Let me tell you.
So
don't do spooky shit. You stole a book from a tomb. Fuck the jar.
Moving rapidly forward in this particular tale of them, we learn that he eventually catches up with his dad after, like,
I imagine putting his pants back on.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Catching up with his dad, and his dad's
whatever.
like, well, see, your family is here and your children are sleeping safe, so, like, everything's fine. And he's like, wow, that was woof, my guy. And his dad's like, seems like maybe that was a bad idea, huh, bro?
Yeah, well, it was.
So
Make this guy travel with a lawyer more often.
Right? So I know that this isn't sort of technically a myth about Bastet, but
I mean, I don't know. It's kind of a myth. About
it
this
is
guy. Honestly,
sort of.
listen, you know what? Don't give me intro shit. Don't give me outro shit. Just make this a movie. This is just
It's
what's
just a Tales from the Crypt episode.
Yeah, it is. Well, no, it's one of those. It's the Hangover movie. This is just Egyptian The Hangover.
Yeah.
Right? The Hangover, fucking 2400 BCE. I would watch the shit out of this movie, bro.
Yeah, it would be great.
Yeah, put whatever his name is, Seth Rogen in it or some shit.
Oh, I don't know.
Make it a whole fucking thing. Well,
but yes, that would be pretty funny.
Literally make it The Hangover 2600 BCE.
I feel like you could pretty easily make this into a Cheech and Chong movie, but like back in the 70s,
yeah.
it would have been piece of cake.
70s Cheech and Chong.
So the idea
100%.
behind this, like, I mean, you can kind of interpret this however you want to, but like some people interpret this as being like, it's a sort of like a parable that like teaches you not to like take advantage of women or to be more strategic in your love affairs.
I guess, yeah.
I'm not entirely sure, but
don't be
it's
an
fantastic.
asshole, maybe. That's
and it reminds me, it reminded me so much of the myth that we told about the Dagda in our Dagda deep dive episode with the porridge and the 3 things. So I hyper enjoyed that and had to share that with everybody. Hilarious. You didn't think you were going to end up with dick in a jar, did ya?
But there it is.
There it is. Yeah. So now that we've already sort of visited Bubastis, let's talk about it. So Bubastis is the city in which Bastet's main temple was in. And this is near modern day Zagazig. It was described by the Greek historian and travel blogger Herodotus, who lived.
Love calling Greeks travel bloggers.
This guy was basically a travel blogger. Prove me wrong.
No. I think it's just the right way to think about it.
Yeah. He was just an ancient Greek travel blogger.
It both undercredits the Greeks and overcredits actual modern travel vloggers because, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this guy's still famous like 3,500 years later.
Yeah.
So Herodotus lived between like 484 and 425 BCE. So again, we know that Bastet has been worshipped since like almost 3000 BC. So there's like a lot of time in between sort of like the initiating of her worship and now. So He describes Bubastis this way. This is a excerpt from his thing. So it goes, except at the entrance, it is surrounded by water. For 2 canals branch off from the river and run as far as the entrance of the temple, yet neither canal mingles with the other, but one runs on this side and the other on that. Each canal is 100 feet wide, and its banks are lined with trees. The gates are 60 feet in height. And when we say gates, we don't mean that they have like a thing that swings open and closes. It's just sort of like an entrance pillar.
The opening, yeah.
And are adorned with sculptures 9 feet high and of excellent workmanship. The temple, being in the middle of the city, is looked down upon from all sides as you walk around. And this comes from the city having been raised, whereas the temple itself has not been raised up, has not been moved up, but remains in its original place. Quite round the temple, there goes a wall, again adorned with sculptures. Within the enclosure is a grove of tall trees planted around a large building in which is the statue of Bast. The form of that temple is square, each side being a stadium in length. Technically, that's not the same as a stadium now. A stadium then was like 220 feet, so more than 2 football fields long, each side. This square, this temple, in a line where the entrance is a road built of stone about 3 stadiums long. So that's 6.5 football fields, leading eastwards through the public market. The road is about 400 feet wide, which is 4 football fields, and is flanked by exceedingly tall trees. This road leads to the Temple of Hermes. At the we discovered over 3,000 mummies of cats there. At Herodotus' time, they were still making cat mummies. In fact, this ended up being kind of a rough thing, and I'm not going to go into it here because I'm sure we got a bunch of cat lovers, and you don't need that in your life. But this place is huge.
Mad cat mummies.
Like, I mean, not just cat mummies, but like huge. This temple was also like built out of pink granite, exquisitely carved. Most temples then, we think, were painted also on the inside. So not just carved, but carved and painted.
Yeah.
And this is pretty common across her other temples too.
The painting thing is like, look up what Greek statuary looked like when it was painted. Because like we know that it was painted. The like white marble statues is a lie. Don't listen to that lie.
They actually removed that. All the paint that could have been seen.
Well, I mean, like, not only was some paint removed, but like time is a motherfucker. So like paint gets destroyed, right? You've owned shit and the paint chipped. Like you've seen an old car. Yeah. Right? These are statues that are way fucking older. But like look that up and you'll see how like sort of extremely different that like painting version could be. Like how more colorful it was.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, basically, the way the ancient Egyptians rolled, particularly in this time frame where this temple was like at its height, would have been the most extra that you can possibly be. And it really sort of was. I mean, when I like read this excerpt from Herodotus, I was like, I had like the music from the Mummy playing in the background. It was just like you pan over a little further and that's it. It is so impressive to me that I like can only dream of how incredibly cool it would look to see something like that. How impressive. I mean, this is well, especially
like back complex. Then with regard to, you know, like not seeing shit like modern New York and such like that. Like it would have been like such a bigger deal.
Exactly. You know? Exactly. Totally. And also the temple of Bastet Bubastis had an oracle. There wasn't just one temple there. There was like a bunch of temples. Like the thing that we just described, that I just described is the shall we say crown jewel of Bast's temple. But much like how we talked about in the episode where we're talking about oracles and pilgrimages, like there's other temples in this complex. Usually there's one temple, more of them going to be nearby. Just like not as big, not as impressive. But this to me is one of the most impressive examples of a temple that you could possibly have, and it is so cool.
Yeah.
So Bast's feast days were just as epic as her temple was described. So first of all, let's talk about the procession of Bast. The festival or procession of Bast happens on the 4th day of the 4th month, but the Egyptians did their calendar differently than we do now. And
Obviously.
this day has changed over the years for a variety of reasons. But the timing that I am using for this is when they started using a calendar that had 365 days just to make my life easier, because otherwise it was a lunar calendar and I don't know exactly when it began or how many days in each. There is a whole bunch of calculations that go into trying to figure out when ancient people were celebrating things.
Yeah.
And it's honestly kind of a nightmare, y'all. So anyway, the festival of Bast takes place on the 4th day of the 4th month, but for the ancient Egyptians, they typically used the rising of the star Sirius as their new year. So Sirius rises at a different time of year now than it did back then 4,000 years ago. And also it rises at a different date depending on where you are in the world, your latitude. So the further north you are or the further south you are, that changes the date. So the procession of Bast takes place 124 days from the new year of Sirius rising. So we are close to San Francisco, and that would put her festival on December 10th for us.
Mm.
But if you look at it where Cairo, Egypt, is, and took that as your place where Sirius the star is going to rise, then that would make the festival procession of Bast in December. Now, like 4,000 years ago, that was like a couple of months earlier, but also Egypt has different seasons than we do in North America for the most part. So, while this is the time, maybe this is not when you want to celebrate.
Yeah, maybe it's not perfectly accurate, but like based on the idea that, okay, so the celebration of Bast is supposed to be on the 4th month of the 4th day, and month was 30 days long.
Yeah.
Right? And in Cairo, Sirius rises on August 1st.
This year,
right? So the 4th month of the 4th day is 124 days by a 30-day month forwards in time, which means 124 days forwards from August 1st this year would be December 3rd this year.
Yeah.
So for in Cairo, and this is like spherical cow in a vacuum math, it should, the procession of Bast should occur December 3rd in like for Northern Californians or people along our like plane, right? Our whatever latitude,
our degree,
whichever one of the tudes we are, away from the equator, then it would be the 10th of December. And again, it's because if New Year is the rise of the Sirius star, then the further away you are from the equator, shifts your New Year slightly.
Yes.
So
exactly. Now there are some pagan calendars that put this on different dates. Yeah. I saw dates ranging from anywhere between February and April 15th, as well as July, when it is now that we're actually recording this. So we often say that if it doesn't work for you to celebrate a Sabbath, a festival on the specific day that you would traditionally have it, celebrate it whenever. And I'm going to say this definitely applies here, because for most of the people probably listening to this, you're going to be listening to this and you're like, well, I don't know if I'm going to want to do these things in December. So, take that as it comes. So,
yeah. Well,
anyway,
it's a different December in fucking Cairo. than in Sonoma County, you know?
So now that we've gone through all of this like weird mathy stuff, thank you for sticking with us. Let's talk about the festival itself, because this is the fun part. So the Festival of Bast is really a celebration honoring Bast's birth. Now, she does have other festivals, most particularly another one called the Sailing of Bast. I don't have any information about this holiday, but that one would happen on the 29th day of the first month, which puts it in actually August or September. So August going by the Cairo calendar, or the Cairo rising of Sirius, and September 13th going by the San Francisco rising of Sirius, which actually makes it a little bit easier to celebrate because it's nice outside still. So we're honoring Bast's birth. This was a huge festival, reportedly drawing over 700,000 people when our favorite ancient Greek travel blogger Herodotus went to this festival.
Sure.
That is an insane number of people.
Yeah, I mean, he went to Comic-Con before Comic-Con got cool, but like this is when Comic-Con was big, you know?
Yeah. I mean, this is more people, I think, than live in the entire county that we live in.
I don't know. Humans are pretty densely packed these days.
Yeah.
We do live in a nightmare, guys.
But that is a really huge amount of people, especially when you think these guys didn't have cars. They didn't have planes.
You just got a camel to
They
places.
just got a camel to, I can't say that. I'm not going to say that. No.
I mean, I
started
assume,
to. And
I assume that that's who you had pull your carts, or horses, or yaks.
Probably there was a lot of
yaks.
boat
I think is
travel.
the wrong place.
Mostly boat travel. Yeah, yaks is the wrong place.
Well, that's even easier. Boat, piece of cake.
So we got another quote from our travel blogger guy. So Herodotus tells us that barges and rivercraft of every description and size, filled with men and women, floated leisurely down the Nile during this festival. The men played on pipes of lotus, the women on cymbals and tambourines. Hey, that sistrum we were talking about, that's exactly what that is. Such as had no instruments accompanied with the music, with the clapping of hands and dances. So if you didn't have a musical instrument, you were doing your best with your hands or dancing or whatever, and other joyous gestures.
Yeah.
Jazz hands.
Listen, if you're not playing the guitar, sometimes you have to stomp, clap, if you know what I'm talking about.
Well, and sometimes you're jazz handing it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are jazz hands.
Did they while they were on the river.
Are jazz hands.
Yes.
And these are victory. You know what I wanted. You fuck.
Yeah. So, jazz hands and dancing while they're on the boats. But when they came to a town, the barges and the boats would like pull in, and everybody would get off the boats and sing, like basically at the dock area. And the women sang. And then he says, playfully mocked the women of that town and threw their clothes over their head. I saw this particular line translated 5 different ways.
Yeah.
And this is probably the most conservative of all of them. Basically, they were like, yo, titties are sagging.
Sure.
Let me see that booty. And then
I mean, it sounds like a fair Mardi Gras.
Yeah, very Mardi Gras.
Show up.
Very Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
And throwing their clothes over their head. Basically, the women would like pull up their skirts and show you their hoo-has.
Hoo-ha.
Yeah, that's what came out. Yeah.
Business term.
Yeah, they would show their vulvas and would dance around, and that was the thing. So when these boats finally, and then they would get back on their boats and sail back down the river, right? So when they reached Bubastis, they then held a wondrously solemn feast, and more wine of the grape was drank in those days than the entire rest of the year. Such was the manner of this festival, and it is said that as many as 700,000 pilgrims have been known to celebrate the Feast of Bast at the same time.
I mean, that sounds like a raging party, bro.
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things is that Bast is sort of one of the ways that you can pay homage to her as a deity is in drunkenness.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, she was the deity of drunkenness,
Yes.
of the sweet imbibe.
Well, it wasn't that she was the deity of drunkenness necessarily, but that drunkenness, because of these rowdy festivals, is so with her
Associated
with her
totally.
that it just sort of like sticks in there. Because the ancient Egyptians probably did have a deity that specifically was the deity of drunkenness, and the Greeks did too. And so did the Romans. So you probably also had that. But this was also known as the Festival of Chewing Onions.
Fair. Okay.
So onions were recognized in ancient Egypt as being protective.
You throw one of those, ain't nobody coming near you. You ever been hit by an onion?
Well,
that shit hurts.
Actually, these were small onions. So
that makes it hurt more. It's a smaller
onions,
surface area for impact. Bro, let me wing a pearl onion at you. You're not coming into this house.
So the onions that they would have had back then are actually walking onions, which is hilarious because we were talking about maybe growing these.
Oh, we're definitely going to grow walking onions. Yeah.
So
they make pearl onions. In fact, a lot of the like native, or not native, but like smaller batch pearl onions that you get are grown from walking onions.
Yeah.
You know? So if they're not like super industrial or whatever.
So at the time, the Egyptians felt that onions were protective, and onions are in fact good against warding off diseases, and snakes are not big fans of onions.
I don't know about that. So seek more professional than us.
Don't
information about
onions
that.
are not a snake repellent, guys.
Yeah.
Please.
Unless it's a full-blown onion and you're throwing that with dead-like precision, right? Because then, I mean, like, yeah, sure, of course. But an onion's going to ward off a bunch of shit if you throw it hard enough. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. It reminds me...
An onion-based cannon, I'm just saying...
It reminds me of that Resident Evil movie where Mia Jovovich goes around and putting quarters into her shotgun.
She's packing her shotgun shells with quarters?
But with pearl onions.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking of like a potato gun, but full of onion. The superior form of a potato gun.
Yeah, so...
Onion gun.
So not only were onions thought to be protective against diseases and also snakes, Bastet is a deity that's sort of in charge of that. She's in charge of protecting you from diseases and snakes. That's and fair. Also
Cats
the onions...
Are weird about cucumbers because of snakes.
Well, and the onions became ripe, basically, right around that time of year. But additionally, so the onions were a large part of general offerings for the Egyptians, but especially for this festival because of this connotation. And onions were thought to purify the mouth.
Sure.
So that when you sang and you spoke and did whatever else you're doing, it's like purified, basically.
It's the cleanest mouth.
They were, exactly. And they were also associated with the heart, which is sort of important with Bast because there is a deity that she sort of evolves into, even though she doesn't. And we're not talking about that here because I couldn't really find a lot of good information about this. So we're going to leave that on a cliffhanger for you.
I don't know about onions are associated with the heart.
That's
crazy.
They were.
Are they maybe heart shaped? We love a good synchronicity. A little. Humes love a good synchronicity.
Yeah, they were a little heart shaped in that. Remember, the Egyptians took out your internal organs to embalm them. Sure. So to an Egyptian, your heart wasn't necessarily the shape the way an emoji heart is.
I mean, I know what an actual human heart is shaped
I do too. Yes.
Yeah. I watched CSI Miami, dog. Okay. Yeah, right? I mean, nobody, I feel like if you're an adult in 2023, you should know the real shape of a human heart.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You've probably seen one of those sans chest.
Yeah. Well, if you think about, onions purifying, you would want to have a pure heart in order to secure a good place in the Egyptian afterlife.
Yeah,
associating the onion
should cut
with
away
the heart.
less than a feather or some nonsense. Right?
Yeah,
something like that.
Yep.
Some shenan.
Yeah. So, that's all about Bast.
Nice, man. Heck yeah.
Yeah, this was a particularly fun one to go down. I definitely had a lot of moments where I'm like, this is my crazy thing that I'm drawing lines.
It seems like Bastet is a pretty chill goddess.
Yeah.
Right? Like, war were declared, Mardi Gras, sweet parties.
And babies.
Ton of babies. You know? Maybe convinced a guy to have sex with a jar because of too much drugs and a little bit of crime.
Not even drugs.
Listen.
Because crime.
Maybe only just crime, but that's a bad crime, bro.
I mean,
he stole the wrong book.
He definitely.
Yeah.
He definitely.
Was that book whispering? Maybe don't touch that fucking book. Right?
It was a particularly magically powerful book. So
stop reading from books. Oh, hey, we're staying in this cabin out in the woods. I found a book in this cabin. Don't read that fucking book. Don't touch that book. We shouldn't have to say that out loud, right? But apparently, for thousands of years, assholes have been reading from books, right? The difference is nowadays we got to deal with animated skeletons and walls full of blood. Back then, you just had a lady make you fuck a jar with hallucinations.
I mean,
so I guess small victories back then.
Yeah.
But damn, bro, that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
Right.
That's basically
you gotta imagine if he faded back into reality, pants down, jar hands. At least one passerby was like, "Oh, isn't that Prince? What's his name? Oh, what's going on over there? I gotta go home and talk to some people."
Yeah, and they were like, "Nope,
right?
Nope, yeah."
The next couple of weeks in court were like, "Did you hear what this guy did in town?" And they're like, "Yeah, don't say that out loud, though. The king, he's real sassed up right now. But that prince, how I feel about some jars? Yeah, I brought 3 jars in. I'm just leaving jars all over the place, right? Just to see what happens, right? This guy's going bonkers, dude. He keeps thinking the jars are being fucking installed all over. I left 4 jars in front of his door this morning. Fuck that guy. You know, that kind of thing.
If you found out about that, if this was a real thing, right? Because we don't know.
Bro, if I found out about some a shenan like that, I don't even need proof. I just need one person in the office to be like, "Did you hear what happened over the weekend?" Tells me this story about jars. I'm going to be like, I'm going to leave so many fucking ball jars in this office. It's going to be ridiculous, man.
Yeah,
I'm going to go to Walmart after work. I'm picking up 3 cases of jars. I'm coming back into work. My badge still works until 8 p.m. I'm leaving jars fucking everywhere. Yeah. It's going to be weird, dog.
Yeah.
I'm coming in 2 hours early to work tomorrow just to watch the jars get discovered.
Also, Bass is associated with jars because her name is essentially an ointment jar and I believe a loaf of bread in a hieroglyph.
Loaf of bread. It's a jar for carbs.
It is
carb jar.
It is kind of you could kind of consider it a jar with a soup bowl.
Yeah.
You carve out the inside, put some delicious clam chowder in there, put a lid on it, now you got a jar.
Chili.
A bread jar.
Yeah.
I'm always going to vote for clam chowder in the bread jar.
Well, I mean, that's just because we're close enough to San Francisco that we can get bang clam chowder in a superior bread jar. But chili in a bread jar, pretty fucking fire.
No, I'm still
chili in a bread jar.
I'm still picking clam chowder.
A beef stew in a bread jar.
A beef stew? I'm here for that.
Here for a beef stew in a bread jar. I mean, chili's just weird beef stew. I'm not talking about a fucking Hormel in a bread jar. I'm talking about sad bread jars.
I'm still picking clam chowder in a bread jar.
I'm not hollowing out a loaf of fucking Wonder Bread up in here. Right?
Gross.
Just painters taping a loaf of Wonder Bread closed, hollowing out the center, pouring in a couple of cans of Hormel.
Oh man, am I glad that Wonder Bread puts soy in all their food.
Oh my god, it's not even good bread. No hate on Wonder Company TM, right? I don't know nothing about them, but they make Twinkies and shit. And those are pretty fire, obviously. I think those are fire. Look at my body. But a Twonky, as it were. But Wonder Bread, the like weird sweet sugar white bread, is an affront to all of the gods. I cannot with that shit, dude. Yeah, I cannot, man. I'm such a wheat bread, like 47 nut grain bread kind of a person. I love those breads. I want a bread that's a bit crunch. You know, or like a rye bread, or like rye. Like I'll fuck with a sourdough or a French, but that shit got to be like a baguette or something with like a bit of crunch on the crust. I don't want no soft ass sourdough. That's weird.
Well, it's pretty impossible for me to find commercially a bread that does not include soy in it.
You know, the companies
basically all I got is sourdough or homemade.
Yeah.
But I make amazing homemade bread, so that's
dude. We make fucking homemade sliced lunch bread. Yeah, that shit's fire. So,
I make that, yes.
Yeah. Oh, I have nothing to do with that. I just cut it thin.
So anyways, normally we share an invocation and a spell for the deity that we are deep diving. However, Bast is a bit special in that we have a prayer for Bast that originally comes from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And that is chapter 164. That this one is associated with. And before we say this prayer, I want to say a few things. So first of all, the Egyptian Book of the Dead is not one book always the same. The Egyptian Book of the Dead was written over the course of like 1100 years with people like adding stuff to it pretty constantly. So there's not one version of it. But not only that, there's not even really a version that anybody particularly agrees on.
Sure, translation's a whole thing.
Oh, no. Not even just that. That's even before translation. So like when someone died, their family would commission the Book of the Dead to be written so it could be buried with their family members so that they could take that to the afterlife, and that would give them a better afterlife for a variety of reasons. That's a bit complicated, but we'll leave it there, right? So if it was a wealthy family, they would be able to pay to have more spells in this Book of the Dead than a poorer family would. So presumably an emperor family or somebody who's very high up in the court would have a whole bunch of entries. They would have a thicker book of the dead, shall we say. Than, say, a merchant family that was relatively well off. They would have a smaller book. But of course, like I just said, there were more things being added to it all the time. So these change. And then you add in what the translations are, and then you add in the nuance of how we understand translations now in like the 21st century as opposed to in the 19th century. There's a lot of differences that kind of go there. So there is not one
there's not like a
Book of the Dead TM.
Yeah, there's not a hard and fast. There's not like a King James Book of the Dead.
No, not in the very least.
Certainly. Yeah, totally.
The prayer that I am reading is one that I found that I just particularly liked the way that they worded everything. You can find in our show notes in the sources, the top 3 links will be to 3 different versions of the Book of the Dead and this prayer, or just the Book of the Dead in general. Some of them don't allow you to bookmark a page, right? So you'd go to chapter 164 and then you would read it. And then that is what it is. So I pulled this off of a website called Isium Sanctuary. .com. They had a particularly nice version of this prayer. I liked it. I don't know exactly who translated it or how it came to it, but that's who I got it from. So here we go.
You want me to read this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
He's never seen this.
I have not. Nope. This is going to be cold read. So cold.
Actually, before we go on, I have to say one thing about the name. In the very first line, we call Bast Seket Bast Ra. That M does not belong.
Sakmet Best Ra.
Seket. So Seket is a term that the ancient Egyptians used that was like a gender neutral term. So it just
meant like priest or something?
It's just sort of like a gender neutral term. For a person. So like in Japanese when somebody is like like a kun or like a chan. You have different things for that.
Yes.
And sometimes they are based on a gender, and sometimes they are based on their relationship to you. That's kind of this. So seket is generally is a gender neutral term that sometimes has to do with deities and priests, and sometimes it does not. We got 4,000 years of stuff, man. And then also, so her name in this is Seket Bast Ra. So Seket is the gender neutral term. Bast is her name, and Ra
Seket
is her
would
father.
be a title or label. The gender neutrality of it notwithstanding.
Yeah.
Right? It has to mean something. It could mean priest, it could mean God, but yeah. And then Bast is who she is, and Ra is what her lineage is.
Yes.
Right? So, like, to add extra honorific, right? You would say, like, your name and then the name of your mother or father, whoever the hell's more important, right? So that way you are connecting, like, deeper to the source, as it were, right? Okay. So, homage to thee, O Seket Bastra, thou mistress of the gods, thou bearer of the wing. A lady of the crowns of the south and of the north, only one sovereign of her father, superior to whom the gods cannot be. Thou mighty one of the enchantments of the boat of millions of years. Thou who art preeminent, who risest in the seas of silence, mistress of the lady of the tomb, mother of the horizon of heaven, gracious one, beloved, destroyer of rebellion, offerings are in thy grasp, and thou art standing in the bows of the boat of thy divine father to overthrow the fiend. Thou hast placed Ma'at at the bows of his boat. Praise be to thee, O lady, who art mightier than the gods, and words of adoration rise to thee from the 8 gods of
Heliopolis.
Heliopolis, thank you. The living souls who are in their chests praise thy mystery. O thou who art their mother, thou source from whom they sprang, who makest for them a place of repose in the hidden underworld, who makest sound their bones and preservest them from terror. Preservest. Who makest them strong in the abode of everlastingness, who preservest them for their evil chamber of the souls of the god of the terrible, who face the terrible face, who is among the company of the gods. So many hyphens. Uchat of Sekhmet, mighty lady, mistress of the gods is thy name. So this one is a proper Sekhmet at the end?
No, that is not.
Uchat of Seket.
Yeah, that's a autocorrect failing me. There.
Yeah, okay, so Uchat of Seket, mighty lady, mistress of the gods in thy name.
Yeah. And Uchat is the all-seeing eye.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. How cool is that?
It's very dope.
We don't generally have... Usually the reason why we write our own invocation and spell is not because we want to be like...
Not like,
but because there isn't anything that we can historically grab that is
or the thing is of like questionable patronage is like sort of an assy way to say that, but like we can't know for no, you know?
Yeah.
So it's sort of sometimes better to just kind of create it of our own volition. And, you know, you've heard us talk about this before. And heck, we talked about it here, right? Or remember, we are all perceiving and interacting with selective 2-dimensional planes of the greater 3-dimensional Godhead with which we're working with. Therefore, and therein, we're all going to have sort of different interpretations. And so when we write a spell or prayer to work with them, we generally work together to try and find like a good middle ground. Spell, invocation, prayer, or otherwise associated craft. But if we can find something of sort of like a much purer context like this, then we're going to try and work with bring that up and mention that and present that to you guys. But also for this or for other things, if you come across something that's sort of like A1 source, right? A1 stake source on this, always let us know, because that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
We're not some bloody end all and be all of knowledge, clearly. I've gotten up 3 times during this podcast to get more to drink. So clearly I'm not the end all and be all of knowledge. But we are interested in these things, and we are presenting them in hopes that you are also interested in these things. And if you have additional bonus, superfluous, or otherwisely interesting information thereof and therein, then share it with the class. I hope you brought enough information for all of us, because we all want to learn more, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes even the most tenuous piece of bonus information is just life shifting when you hear it, and you're just like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna go take a 5-minute break, take a lap around the property or something, to cope with that new knowledge.
Yeah.
So
I'm just gonna lay on the couch
I'm just gonna
for a few minutes and just existentially.
I'm just gonna lay here and stare at the sky.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. It's probably okay.
Yeah. So, that leads us to our next section, which is correspondences. Your favorite part, the reading of lists.
Lists.
Yeah. So to recap, Bastet is the goddess of protection, childbirth, fertility, pleasure, drunkenness, music, perfume, retribution, war, cats, the sun, and the moon.
Yeah, not just the moon. Don't believe the hype.
Yeah, not just the moon. Don't believe the hype. Her colors associated with her are black, gold, green, silver, and really kind of any bright color. As for animals, it's cats, guys. Shocker, right?
Yeah. What kind of cats? All cats.
All cats. Yeah. Definitely
land cats, sky cats, water cats.
Especially if you can find a picture of a cat eating a snake.
Yeah.
Because it's definitely a thing that Bass does. As for stones, alabaster, which we think actually is comes from the root of her name.
Sure. Yeah.
Cat's eye, carnelian, pink granite, rose quartz, tiger's eye, sunstone, all associated with Bastet. Of course, lapis too. You can add in there, sort of an all-purpose one.
Sure.
For plants, catnip.
Obviously.
Big shocker.
Yeah.
Also, frankincense, lotus, mint, myrrh, any sort of reeds, also like marshy plants, vervain, and water lily. For foods, we're looking at fish, onions, and wine primarily.
Nice.
And
I would eat that. It's a good soup.
That does sound delicious,
it's good
right?
soup. Fish, onions, and wine. Love all 3 of them.
Here for it.
Yeah.
So there are actually quite a few miscellaneous things that she's associated with too. So an ankh, baskets, the Eye of Horus, jars.
Yep. She made that guy do a thing to a jar.
Also, her name might actually mean jars, but we don't really know exactly.
Yeah.
The moon. Musk, which is neither a plant nor an animal, but sort of both.
Musk, the scent, not the person.
Yeah. Perfume she's associated with, as well as a sistrum, which is that percussion instrument, and the sun.
Nice.
So now y'all know all about Bast.
Such is a Bastet.
Yeah.
What was the Isaucian version of
Bastet?
Bastet.
Yeah.
A Bastet.
The devouring lady.
Yeah, nice. I'm into it, man. The devouring lady. Somebody, that better be a fucking rock band, bro. Let me tell you how upset I'm gonna be when we're done recording this and I Google that and it's not a flippin' metal band.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be so angry. I'm gonna be let down, guys.
Yeah.
So get on that if it doesn't already exist. Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Super dug Book of the Dead stuff, right? don't read from creepy books. I'm just gonna give you a little disclaimer on that. If you find a book,
must not read from the book.
A guy yelled it at you. Come on.
We're gonna have to
dogs.
watch. We're gonna have to watch The Mummy.
Yeah. We went on a movie venture today. So tomorrow, another movie venture. I'm here for it.
In totally different direction. Yeah.
Oh man, today was a weird movie venture.
Necessary.
Yeah, it was though. It was though. So yeah. Moving right along, drifting less off course. We would like to thank our patrons. So if you would like to support us and the thing that we're doing and the podcast and all this, we have a Patreon. You can go visit that, Nerd Jive on Patreon.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Whatever.
And
the links are below. Whatever. Yeah. The links are below. Don't worry about that.
And for only $5 a month, you can support us.
Yeah.
So that's what things cost $5. Hey, that's the tip that I leave when we go get coffee.
Regular stuff. Oh my God, no. We leave more of a tip than
we
that.
Definitely do, yeah.
That's a lie.
The coffee itself is worth $5. Their work worth way more than $5.
Yeah, it's good coffee. It's good coffee. Oh,
yeah.
Man. So much bad coffee out there. But anywho, we would like to thank our patrons, Alan, Miranda, Somewhere, Alexa, Helena, Stacy, and Panda. You guys keep us in line.
Yeah, thank you for helping us do what we do and better every single time.
Absolutely.
We very much appreciate it.
Absolutely. So yeah, and if you want the complete list of correspondences as well, the Book of Shadows page associated with the Bastet deep dive, that comes out on our Patreon. Those are fun little graphic things that I do. So look out for that. Next time it's another pub chat. So do you have a pub chat question or any question really? I mean, anything can be anything.
Or a topic for us to riff on.
Yeah, topic for us to riff on or anything like that, right? We always have some questions that we can always bring up, but we're also here to answer your questions or explore something that you've been interested in or, just address something weird and esoteric,
or just
we love that stuff.
Kind of talk off the cuff
just a chit chat
about something.
Those are much more sort of chill adventures. So next up is that, and thank you for joining us for this podcast. While we're at that, don't forget to like this video if you're watching it on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel for more of us. Share us with your friends so that way it spreads. And if you're watching us or listening, I guess, on a podcast thing, do whatever that is. Leave a review, subscribe, heart, or otherwise emoji the thing that we're doing.
They're all a little different.
Because they're all a little different,
yeah.
And I don't care to learn what each one of them means. And we will catch you guys next time. Whatever. Either way, I have been John Norgrove. This has been Julie Norgrove. This has been the Horn
and Cauldron podcast.
And we will catch you guys next time. Stay magical, folks.
Yeah, and don't forget, breathe in self-confidence and breathe out self-doubt.